In today's video, we're taking a look at an article from The Athletic which goes over 5 potential blockbuster trades that we may see at this NHL offseason. What are the most likely destinations for some of these top players? What kind of returns are we talking about? And how likely are they to happen? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned today, we're exploring some NHL trade rumors around 5 top NHL players that could be involved in some blockbuster NHL trades as the NHL offseason gets into full swing here. We're only a mere few weeks away from the NHL expansion draft, followed by the NHL entry draft, and of course free agency, and it is expected to be one of the most hectic and busiest NHL offseasons in a long time, potentially even one of the busier ones in modern history, given all the dynamics that we're facing here with league revenues being down. Teams are really tight on cap space due to a flat salary cap, and there's a number of players that personally want to be moved, along with teams that have big ticket contracts that they would like to move. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and it's hard to say exactly what all is going to go down, but it could be an extremely busy and exciting offseason. So I do recommend that you kind of buckle up and get ready, because there could be a ton of NHL news over the next number of weeks. Now, as I mentioned, this article is mainly written by Athletic writer Scott Burnside, but he does have a guest writer with each player that we're talking about that writes for their local team that's being discussed. So we're going to start off here by exploring the Jack Eichel sweepstakes. Now, of course, Burnside, as well as Buffalo writer John Vogel, go over the likelihood of an Eichel trade. They both agree that the likelihood here is pretty decent, given the fact that it's pretty apparent that the team and the player basically want a divorce. Something that's transpired certainly leads us to think that a trade is likely happening sometime here in the next couple of weeks. Now, of course, they go over all the usual suspects that we've talked about here before as teams that have been linked to Eichel, including the California teams like the LA Kings and the Anaheim Ducks. Of course, the New York Rangers are a team that's been mentioned by numerous sources. Of course, you get the Vegas Golden Knights after they were eliminated by Montreal. That was the first thing that came out, and a lot of people speculating that they would be jumping in on the Eichel sweepstakes. You also can't rule out teams like the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Minnesota Wild, who are both really been looking hard for a top center for quite some time. So certainly with all those teams and others being in the mix here, what kind of package is it going to take? Well, we know that the Sabres have been looking for around 6 pieces, and they all agree here that that's likely a little bit too much. We've heard other NHL insiders like Elliot Friedman and Darren Dreger both say recently between podcasts or radio hits, saying that, you know what, that's too much and it's going to have to come down. And a lot of NHL teams are kind of having conversations about shying away, not getting real serious here, and to some extent even leaking reports that they're out of the Eichel sweepstakes given the high asking price. So Kevin Adams, you can't blame him for swinging for the fences, trying to hit a home run here, given the fact that the Sabres team is in desperate need of some changes. They need to get this right. They can't screw up this trade. The last time they traded a big-time player was Ryan O'Reilly, and that trade return for them ended up horribly wrong, and they don't really have a whole lot to show for it here today. Meanwhile, O'Reilly goes on to win a ton of hardware, including the Stanley Cup, with the St. Louis Blues in the not too distant future. So they don't want that to happen again. So obviously they got to tread very, very carefully. They both make their predictions on where they see this player going, and both writers agree that the most likely destination for Jack Eichel this offseason will be the Los Angeles Kings. A couple of reasons. For one, they agree here that Jack Eichel needs to be a player surrounded by some really good veterans who can teach him a lot when it comes to NHL leadership and learning to win, and him not having to be the primary top player with all the pressure on his shoulders. I think it's fair to say that he's played well in Buffalo and put up some good point totals, and I think, I'm not saying he's a bad captain or a poor leader or anything of that nature, but given the fact that he's still quite young, being surrounded by an older, mature core players that have the experience and the winning pedigree from the past, like Doughty and Kopitar and Dustin Brown, etc., he could learn a ton from them, and it would take the pressure off not having to be the top guy every single night. And when things don't go well, it's all on you facing the media and all that. It's just something that he wouldn't have to deal with there. And of course, not only that, the LA Kings are loaded with young talent and picks that they could offer up to Buffalo in a really terrific futures-based package to really get them interested here in pulling off the deal. I do think as well that the Sabres would probably prefer to send him west, but I don't think the Sabres and Kevin Adams can be too picky here. If teams like the Columbus Blue Jackets, for example, come calling with the best package, I think they need to do that. But I do think that is a little bit less likely. I mean, there's other teams that are, going to stand the best chance here. They're probably mostly in the West outside of the New York Rangers. The Rangers, I think, can compete with the Kings on a potential package if they want to include young talent like a Lafreniere or a Kakko. I'm just not convinced at this point that new GM Chris Drury is going to want to do that. Whereas the Kings, like I said, they're loaded with high draft picks for this year's draft, which is great. It's going to be enticing to Buffalo. It's also going to be enticing to look at their prospect pool and to pick a couple of those players and maybe even a younger player off the roster as well. Like Buffalo could come through with 4 or 5 pieces here with picks and prospects to really set up the Buffalo Sabres nicely for the future and get some good young talent to play with the existing young talent that will stay behind. So let me know your thoughts on their opinions here. The LA Kings, I've been saying it all along as well. I think the Kings are certainly going to be one of the top contenders. I do think other teams like the Rangers or the Ducks would likely be right up there too, and I wouldn't completely count out the Minnesota Wild. I think Bill Guerin would love to have a guy like Eichel to play with Kaprizov. But you know what? I think there's going to be some other players out there that could be explored as well. And even like Vegas, I'm sure they'll be in on Eichel too. But there's some other centers we're going to talk about here today that might be the fallback option if Eichel becomes too expensive and they just can't get that deal done. Now, next up, we're looking at Seth Jones, and this is part of the article. Scott Burnside works with Aaron Portzline of The Athletic, who covers the Columbus Blue Jackets and is extremely well plugged in to the intel going on around that team. Now, of course, they go over the teams that have been linked to Jones that we've talked about here before as well, including the Avalanche. The Flyers are another big team as well, being in the mix here, as well as Chicago. And there's even been some talk about the Maple Leafs, although that would prove to be difficult. And I know that Burnside goes to mention in the article that he feels the Winnipeg Jets would be a terrific place for Jones. However, he does have a modified no trade and could block a team like that. Not convinced that he would go to Winnipeg. And you know what? There's been some talk that he would prefer not to play in Canada at all. And even for the Leafs to stand a chance, they would have to shed a significant amount of salary. I'm not saying it's going to be impossible, but I think for Winnipeg and Toronto to really stand a chance, it would be a lot more difficult. I think the Hawks, the Avalanche, or the Flyers are all the most likely destinations here. And I do think at the end of the day, Jarmo Kekalainen would probably prefer to trade him westward, like I said about Eichel. Same thing. Generally, you want to send star players to the opposite conference if you can help it. But it's also believed by Aaron Portzline that Jarmo Kekalainen is going to take the best offer possible. And if that means sending him to division rival Philadelphia, that he's open to do that. He wants to get the right package in return. And ultimately, at the end of the day here, that's something that could get it done, then so be it. But they're looking at probably bringing in at least 3 to 4 pieces in return. They're going to want probably another younger defenseman coming back in return, probably a higher first-round pick or as high as they can get at least. And you're looking at a couple of other pieces, including at least one player off the roster, maybe another prospect. So not going to be as big of a package as Eichel, but it also is going to depend largely on if he will sign an extension with the acquiring team. That will certainly drive the price up. If he ends up going to a team on a one-year contract as a rental, then it's certainly going to be a smaller package coming back, which is probably not what the Jackets' preference would be. But of course, they can't really control that situation. If Jones is willing to sign, then great, they'll get more. But if not, then it's going to be a smaller return. I'm looking at probably maybe 3 pieces going back if he's a rental, but if he goes on an extension, then it could be 4. It really depends on what the pieces are. Like, you can't just say 4 or 5 pieces. It depends on the quality of those pieces, and then we could be looking at a pretty significant return here. Burnside feels that the Avalanche are the most likely team to get this deal done, offering up their first-round pick and probably a player like a Samuel Girard or possibly an Alex Newhook. There could be some other pieces in the mix, maybe another draft pick, maybe another prospect. It's difficult to say exactly for sure, but those would be the centerpieces going to the Jackets. Now, I think an exciting young defenseman like Girard would interest Columbus in losing Seth Jones. Now, he is under contract for an extended time as well at a similar type of cap hit. It's not drastically different, so I don't know exactly the preference here by Columbus. They may prefer a young center like Alex Newhook, although I'm not convinced that the Avalanche would be as likely to trade Newhook. If they're bringing in Jones, they can afford to lose a defenseman, obviously, but I think they're less likely to trade Newhook because they're going to need some guys on ELCs that are able to produce here in the next couple of years, because there's going to be some tight cap situations with guys like Landeskog and Makar coming due now. You got McKinnon coming up in the short term. They're going to have to watch their pennies pretty closely, and if they're acquiring Jones, to me, that would be likely without an extension. It would likely be a go-for-it year year next year where they go all in, max out as much as they can under the cap, and do their best to win a cup. And then they're going to have to disassemble a little bit and cut back some salary as they go into the next big contracts for some of these top guys. So to me, that it does make sense that it could happen, but that's likely how it plays out. Now, when it comes to Aaron Portzline, he feels the Flyers are the most likely destination, that Chuck Fletcher is going to be ponying up the best package here, and that Jones would stand a better chance of getting an extension done. You're likely, again, looking at a first-round pick, probably a defenseman like a Sanheim or a Myers going back, maybe even Travis Konechny being involved as well, and there could be another piece too, another prospect or another maybe a mid-round pick or something to that effect. But obviously they have a difference of an opinion on these destinations. I don't know about either of them. I think I wouldn't rule out Chicago here myself. I'm not sure I'd go as far as to predict Chicago as being the landing spot, but based on everything we're hearing right now, if they can pull off that Duncan Keith trade, I would not rule out Chicago and might even give them the edge here to be the landing spot for Seth Jones. Now, before we jump into the other trade talk, I do want to take a moment and pause for our channel sponsor, Manscaped. Top Shelf Hockey is proud to be sponsored by Manscaped. Of course, with Manscaped, we have a special offer here for all Top Shelf Hockey viewers where you can get 20% off and free shipping into all orders at manscaped.com. Now, of course, Manscaped just launched a brand new Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, which is a fantastic product. They've taken a level up here, even again with the skin-safe replaceable blades. It's waterproof, it's wireless charging, has a travel lock on it, as well as a nice light so you don't miss what you're doing. So certainly a terrific product. Now, many people associate Manscaped with their trimmers, which is certainly kind of their top product, but they do have a lot of other great options as well, including what they call the Weed Whacker, which is another trimmer for your ears and nose. And they have a variety of deodorants and sprays as well, which also keep you fresh and are terrific as well. So certainly Manscaped has a lot to offer, and we certainly highly recommend all of their products. So check out manscaped.com and use promo code TSH for 20% off and free shipping. So thanks very much for watching that promotional video. I do appreciate it. Certainly consider checking out their products. The link will be in the pinned comment down below as well as the description if you want to check it out and get the information there on the promo code. Now going back to the content, the third blockbuster trade that we might actually see this offseason would be Capitals center iceman Evgeni Kuznetsov. Now, he could possibly end up being like the backup plan for a lot of these teams that don't get Jack Eichel. Now, some of the teams in on Eichel, like the Kings, like the Rangers, don't necessarily absolutely have to go out and acquire a center iceman. It's just an opportunity for them to upgrade and really significantly improve their team. But it's not like they're in a situation where they need to do it. It just accelerates things. But teams like Columbus and Minnesota really do need that center iceman that much more than those other teams, and they could be more of a fallback option. You could include Vegas in there as well as a team who really needs help at the center position. Now, Kuznetsov could be a little bit more complicated, and of course, both of the writers here, including Scott Burnside and Capitals beat writer El Bashir, both acknowledge that this deal will be more likely to be difficult to get done, and it's not going to stand as good of a chance as the others that we've already discussed or that we will discuss later in this video. But Kuznetsov comes with a cap hit of over $7 million with 4 years left on the deal, but he's been kind of in and out of hot water with the Capitals, and it's time for a change is what it looks like there. Now, of course, like I said, when you look at the teams that are likely going to be in the mix, you could include a lot of the same ones that we said here in the Eichel sweepstakes. They even mentioned as well the Ottawa Senators possibly being in the mix because they have a need for a top six center. But no offense to Kuznetsov, I don't see Ottawa, certainly tearing up the phone lines here to get him onto their mix. They could use a center iceman, sure, but they don't need to. They could stick with their young core, continue to grow, and even if they do acquire through trade or free agency a outside source for a top six center, I don't see them taking on a 4-year deal at $7.8 million. So that's very, very unlikely here, in my opinion. Now, it's possible here as well that the Capitals might have to retain some money or take back at least something in the form of a contract to help offset some of the financial commitments that the team is going to have to take on with this Kuznetsov contract. And obviously, it's going to depend on what they want here. I think they probably would prefer some younger assets that they continue to build around. A lot of the top guys on this Capitals team are not young. I mean, you've got Ovechkin and Backstrom and Karlsson and Oshie, and obviously you can include Kuznetsov. They're not super young guys, and this team needs to start working on the future and getting younger. They don't have the deepest prospect pool because they've made a lot of trades over the years to go for it and continue to add at the deadline. So outside of a guy like Connor McMichael, there's really not a lot in the forward group that's somewhat exciting for the future. So if they could add a futures-based prospect, at least one or two of them coming back in a Kuznetsov trade would probably be preferable. Now, Scott Burnside predicts Vegas as being the most likely destination for Kuznetsov. They know firsthand what it's like to play against this guy in the Stanley Cup final. Kuznetsov could be a good fit there, but it's going to be tough for them to do when it comes to the cap. I would assume guys like Cody Glass and Peyton Krebs would be the top players Washington would be interested in taking back, but they'd have to take something off the roster to offset things, or they're going to have to retain some salary. It's not going to be easy. Obviously, Vegas is likely looking to do a goalie trade, as we talked about here before, which could also be something we do. It's not on today's list here, but it could be. I do think a Marc-Andre Fleury trade is extremely likely this offseason as well. The local Washington writer predicts that this trade does not get done and Kuznetsov remains with Washington. He thinks the contract is going to be too much. He said other league executives around the NHL have been paying close attention as well to what's gone on with Kuznetsov when it comes to his decline play and some of the off-ice stuff that the Capitals have been unhappy with, and he's not sure there's really going to be much for takers out there and things that might just prove to be too difficult, and he'll remain in the Caps jersey next year. Now, next up, we're going to talk about Johnny Gaudreau of the Calgary Flames. Another disappointing season for Calgary. Will that lead to a shakeup of the core and guys like Gaudreau or Monahan being traded out of Calgary? And it's a real possibility. Johnny Gaudreau is down to the final year of his contract as well. And I've said all along, the Calgary Flames need to make a decision on this guy. Either they re-sign him to an extension or they trade him this offseason. One or the other, in my opinion, absolutely has to happen. I would not go into the final year of this deal not knowing what the future holds for this player. I do think it's a good chance that he leaves via free agency if you make him go that far without signing or trading him. So I personally would not push my luck in that regard. There are many people that feel that he really wants to play closer to home in the eastern U.S. We'll see in due time here when his contract expires if that's really his feelings or if he's willing to stay in Calgary or wherever he gets traded to if he does indeed get traded. I mean, the most likely teams being discussed in this article by Scott Burnside and Flames writer Haley Salvian include the New York Islanders as well as the Anaheim Ducks or the Philadelphia Flyers. The Flyers would be considered like his hometown team. It's been a team he's seemed to be linked to forever and a day here, but of course nothing has ever come to be. Now, you could certainly make an argument to why each of these teams makes a lot of sense. The Islanders need a dynamic player to play with Matthew Barzal. I've said it numerous times on various videos on this channel since they were eliminated from the playoffs, and he could certainly be that guy. I mean, Gaudreau playing on a line with Barzal and maybe Anders Lee, to me, would be a terrific fit. I mean, Lee could be the more physical winger, creating the time and space for these guys, and Gaudreau and Barzal are both players who are extremely dynamic, great stick handlers, great playmakers, and could help set each other up for a lot of goals. So it would be a fun possibility. Of course, that would mean that they would not be able to re-sign Kyle Palmieri, but you know what? If I'm Lou Lamoriello and the Islanders, I'd take Gaudreau over Palmieri any day. He's certainly more dynamic and would probably be a better fit there. Not that Palmieri was a terrible fit. He had a good playoff run, but longer term, I think it would be a nice upgrade to get a guy to play with Barzal. And of course, it also means that you're likely wanting to move on, which I think they're going to want to try anyway from Jordan Eberle. So in that case, it kind of complicates things for other roster spots, but it's something that I think the Islanders could work out. I don't really know exactly what a trade package would take for Gaudreau here. I mean, obviously, the Islanders have some interesting young players that might be movable for them. Obviously, the Calgary Flames are going to be in a situation here where they're going to want something back as well. So they're likely going to want a roster player who can play in their top six too. So it would certainly be a little bit more of a hockey trade, I think, if Gaudreau went to a team like the Islanders. A team like the Flyers, to me, they'd probably offer up a guy like Konechny. Maybe even Shane Gostisbehere could be included in that deal. I'm not sure that too many teams are going to be super crazy with the contract, but there would have to be enough pieces going back and forth to kind of offset each other there. And of course, Anaheim, like I said, they're a team looking to make some moves here. Bob Murray's definitely looking to shake things up with the Ducks, and Gaudreau could be of interest to them for sure. Now, writer Scott Burnside predicts Anaheim as being the most likely trade destination for Johnny Gaudreau. I mean, they do have a lot of young pieces there that might interest the Calgary Flames. They do have some other roster players as well that could be of interest to them that are still reasonably young. So I do think it's reasonable to expect that they could put together a good trade package. Now, of course, they do have the number 3 pick in the draft. Would they consider trading that for Johnny Gaudreau? If I'm Calgary, I'd be very, very interested in that if that's something that they're willing to offer. Now, when it comes to writer Haley Salvian, she feels that a Gaudreau trade might become too complicated and that it's more likely that the Flames do not trade Gaudreau, but do trade his line mate and top center, Sean Monahan, which I do agree wholeheartedly here that a Monahan trade, I think, is going to be more likely. I would not rule out the possibility that we could see multiple big trades out of Calgary and that maybe both guys get traded, probably in separate deals. But, if I had to peg which one was more likely to get done, I would likely pick Monahan. But I do think extensive changes are in store for the Flames this year, and I would not rule out both guys wearing different uniforms next season. Now, lastly here, we want to touch on Oliver Ekman-Larsson of the Arizona Coyotes. This one, out of all the deals discussed in this article, was rated probably the most likely to be not completed and most likely to be difficult to get done, given how much money he has left on this deal. Several years left at over $8 million. Going to be difficult. The Coyotes are going to have to retain a significant portion for the remainder of this contract or take back some really unfavorable contracts. Now, of course, some of the teams he's been linked to include former teams like Vancouver and Boston that were linked to him last year when it was quite open in public about trade talks and how things were going, that those were the only teams he was willing to waive to. Now, according to other inside sources, he's willing to look at additional teams this year. How the Coyotes plan to handle this is they're basically, instead of getting a list from him, they're going around the league trying to find deals and will approach him to waive when they find deals, if they do, that are acceptable to them. Now, like I said, the Oilers have been a team because of his former coach Dave Tippett being interested in bringing him to the Edmonton Oilers organization, but they've also now been linked to Duncan Keith. There's been rumors that they're even interested in bringing back Tyson Barrie. All of those things cannot happen. It's just not realistic. So what direction the Oilers go in for their blue line is certainly debatable right now. If they can move a bad contract to bring in Duncan Keith, they might do that more so. And a deal like for Ekman-Larsson might become a lot less likely. I mean, a team like Boston does make sense. They'd have a really hard time fitting the money in. So I'm not sure how they can really make that deal work. And Boston's not a team with much in the way of contracts that you would kind of deem to be really unfavorable or bad that the Coyotes could take back either. So I do think it would be a very challenging package to put together. Now, the Canucks are another team that probably have more bad contracts, but at the same time, I just don't know that it's really going to be able to be worked out either. A lot of their contracts that are not great are a lot shorter term than this one. So do they really want another $8 million man on their roster when they have to do massive deals for Pettersson and Hughes this offseason? I just don't know how likely that's going to be. Now, this part of the article was shared by Thomas Drance, who writes for the Vancouver Canucks as well. And between Burnside and Drance, both agree that it's going to take a futures-based package with picks and prospect to get the deal done. The Coyotes would have to take back a significant amount when it comes to either retaining or a bad contract. But at the end of the day, they both feel that this blockbuster trade is likely going to be too difficult to get done, and that is more likely than not that he remains a member of the Arizona Coyotes for at least another season as they continue to find ways to shed themselves of this contract. But it's been clear that new GM Bill Armstrong wants to take this team through more of a rebuild and obviously move on from a lot of the bigger contracts on the team. Like, there's a lot of other rumors like Connor Garland, Darcy Kumper, Phil Kessel, all being potential trade bait for them this year as well. Let me know your thoughts on these blockbuster trades down in the comments. Which ones do you think are most likely? Give me your most likely destinations for these 5 players in the comments, as well as some mock trades so we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news and rumors and all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.